At the dawn of the 20th century, humanity was obsessed with the blank spaces on the map. It was the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, a brutal race to conquer the last unknown continent on Earth. Roald Amundsen had claimed the South Pole. Robert Falcon Scott had died trying. One man, a veteran of those earlier polar battles, felt the door of history closing. His name was Sir Ernest Shackleton, and he dreamed of one last great prize, the first ever transcontinental crossing of Antarctica. It was an ambition bordering on madness, an 1,800-mile trek across the most hostile environment imaginable. To do it, he secured a vessel as extraordinary as the mission itself. She was a Norwegian ship named Polaris, but Shackleton rechristened her with a name that would become legend: the Endurance. Her hull was made of oak and greenheart timbers so dense they were nearly indestructible. Her motto, emblazoned on her stern, was a bold promise: by endurance we conquer. But as the men who signed up for this hazardous journey would soon learn, conquering the Antarctic was nothing compared to the challenge of conquering death itself. In the late days of 1914, the Endurance stood ready at the Grytviken whaling station in South Georgia. To find his crew, Shackleton had supposedly placed a brutally honest ad in London newspapers. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Incredibly, thousands applied, creating a mix of hardened sailors and eager young scientists. The most surprising crew member was one he didn't even hire. A young man named Perce Blackborough, after being turned down for being too young, was smuggled aboard by his friends. When he was finally discovered at sea, too far to turn back, Shackleton looked him over and delivered a stark warning. If anyone has to be eaten, you will be the first. Despite the grim introduction, Blackborough was quickly signed on as a steward and put to work. On board were these 28 men, along with 69 Canadian Huskies yelping with excitement. As they prepared to leave, the veteran whalers on the wharf, men who knew the Southern Ocean better than anyone, shouted warnings. They insisted the sea ice was the worst they'd seen in years. "We told him the ice was thick," one later recalled. "He only smiled and ordered away." Shackleton, choosing momentum over caution, gave the decisive order: cast off. The journey south was a passage through a majestic and menacing gallery of white. The expedition's photographer, Frank Hurley, worked tirelessly, capturing the alien beauty on his glass plates and even experimenting with early color photography. The science team, including biologist Robert Clark and geologist James Wordie, collected specimens. But the whalers' warnings proved prophetic. On January 18, 1915, just one day's sail from their destination, the engine room fell silent. The pack ice, a churning mass of frozen sea, had closed in, gripping the hull in a frozen fist. The Endurance was trapped. For months, the ship became their winter station, drifting with the ice. To fight off the crushing monotony of the months-long polar night, the men established routines. They converted their quarters into a noisy, smoky haven they called the Ritz, where they held boisterous sing-alongs accompanied by a banjo. They played football on the ice, the dogs yapping at their heels. But as the days grew shorter, so did their hopes. The transcontinental journey was now impossible. The sled dogs, once the key to their ambition, became a drain on their dwindling supplies. The decision was made to put them down, a heartbreaking task for the men who had cared for them, Among the animals lost was Mrs. Chippy, the beloved cat of the ship's carpenter, Harry McNish. It was a loss that would breed resentment. Then, the ice began its final assault. The pressure became a living thing, a predator squeezing its prey. The ship groaned, not like a machine, but like a dying animal. A sound of splintering timbers echoed across the ice, a sound one crewman described as bones snapping. On October 27th, Shackleton gave the only order left: abandon ship. As the men salvaged what they could, Frank Hurley made an agonizing choice. He had over 500 fragile glass plate negatives, a priceless record of their journey. He knew he could only save a fraction. He and Shackleton stood on the ice and smashed more than 400 plates, keeping only the 120 best. It was a brutal act of restraint to ensure he wouldn't risk his life trying to save them all. On November 21st, the crushed Endurance finally sank beneath the waves. They were now 28 castaways on a floating piece of ice. They established Patience Camp, hunting seals and penguins for a grim stew they called hoosh. It was here, at their most vulnerable moment, that Shackleton faced a mutiny. The carpenter, Harry McNish, still resentful over the loss of his cat, argued that with the ship gone, their contract was void. They were free men, no longer under his command. Think about that choice. In the most hostile environment on Earth, the one thing holding them together, authority and discipline, was about to shatter. Shackleton confronted McNish directly, his voice like iron. Every man, he declared, remained under his command until they were safe. The mutiny was quelled. When the ice floe finally fractured in the spring, the men took to 3 small lifeboats. For 5 hellish days at sea, stalked by killer whales, their tongues swollen with thirst, they rowed until they landed on the barren shore of Elephant Island. It was solid ground, but it was not a rescue. It was just a slightly more stable prison. Shackleton knew that waiting for rescue was a death sentence. He had to go get it. He left his trusted second-in-command, Frank Wild, in charge of the 22 men who would remain. A veteran of the Antarctic, established a rigid routine. They overturned 2 boats to create a makeshift hut called the Snuggery, and every morning Wild would issue the same order: lash up and stow hammocks, boys, the boss may come today. Meanwhile, Shackleton and 5 of his toughest companions, including the brilliant navigator Frank Worsley and the indomitable Tom Crean, set out in a 22-foot lifeboat, the James Caird. Before they left, the carpenter McNish, the same man who had mutinied, used his skill to raise the boat's sides, making the impossible journey merely improbable. Their destination? The whaling stations of South Georgia, 830 miles away across the most violent ocean on the planet. For 17 harrowing days, they were battered by monstrous waves. Worsley navigated by sextant, with only 4 brief sightings of the sun, a feat now considered one of the greatest in history. A rogue wave, which Worsley mistook for the sky, nearly sank them. They had to constantly chip ice from the boat to keep from capsizing. They landed on South Georgia, but on the wrong side. Before them lay the island's unmapped, glacier-carved mountain range. For 36 hours, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean climbed and trekked with nothing but a rope and a carpenter's adze, until they heard a sound that brought tears to their eyes. The steam whistle from the Stromness whaling station. They stumbled into the station, their faces blackened by blubber smoke, their clothes in tatters. The station manager, who knew Shackleton, didn't recognize the wild men who stood before him. But rescue was at hand. After 3 months and 4 rescue attempts, Blocked by impenetrable winter ice, Shackleton finally found a ship that could make it. A small Chilean steamer named the Yelcho. On August 30th, 1916, he sailed back to Elephant Island. Frank Wild and all 22 men were there, waiting on the shore. They had survived for 4.5 months. The expedition failed to cross the continent. They returned to a world being torn apart by the First World War, and many of the crew went straight from the ice to the trenches. But in the end, the expedition achieved something far greater. Shackleton had not conquered the Antarctic, but he had conquered death itself, bringing every single one of his men home alive. His story became the ultimate epic of survival, a testament to the true meaning of the ship's promise: by endurance we conquer.